Right. Okay. So in the last class, we talked about Flecknoe and how Dryden categorizes Shadwell as not belonging to the hierarchy of Johnson or Fletcher at all, but belonging to the hierarchy of the fools and a writer of farcical plays. Now, Flecknoe, now comes in this particular section, comes the central thesis of the poem, the handing over of power, or the coronation of Shadwell. Now, the coronation of Shadwell, of course, follows the Aeneid. And Dryden's dexterity or art of the mock heroic lies in replacing every single detail of the coronation ceremony with its corresponding pathetic mock heroic counterpart. What I'm trying to suggest is that Dryden takes every detail of the classical coronation. Please remember that the classical coronation was a highly organized ritual with its own set of paraphernalia, with its own set of details. So Dryden takes the details from various coronations to create the heroic structure of Shadwell as the emperor of folly, and then replaces every single corresponding detail of the coronation with a pathetic anticlimactic parallel. It is in this elevation diminution that the satire operates, that the ridicule operates, that the humor is articulated. So we shall observe very carefully what these details are. I have also suggested that Dryden is deliberately creating a geography of Grub Street as the empire or the center of Shadwell's power. This location of Grub Street, as we have seen, is a locus for prostitutes, punk actors, for writers, hack writers, and this Grub Street is presided over by Shadwell and dominated by the metaphor of waste and scatology. Now let us see how the details of the coronation appear. Now, Empress Fame, writes Dryden, had published the renown of Shadwell's coronation through the town. The reference is, of course, once again to the Aeneid, where Dido's fall has been announced. Therefore, Shadwell's coronation, the fact of Shadwell's coronation, has been announced through the town. Roused by the report of fame, the nations meet. So the people throng the place of Shadwell's coronation. And what is this place? Near Bunhill and distant Watling Street. Now, these were the places from which Grub Street would begin. Therefore, on the fringes of Grub Street, people have started to gather near Moorfields so that they can witness Shadwell's coronation. So the entire crowd is now assembled to witness the coronation. No Persian carpet spread the imperial way. If you remember the English coronation, then at Westminster Abbey, the prince actually walks across the Persian red carpet. But in this case, there's no Persian carpet. So the first parallel is that, the location is not the court, but Grub Street. Second parallel is that there's no Persian carpet. Instead, what lies? But scattered limbs of mangled poets lay, scattered limbs, pages of the books, of the torn books of the poor poets, of the people who have the books which have not been sold. From dusty shops, neglected authors come. So dusty shops, in the sense bookshops which do not have many clientele. Therefore, these are poets whose works never sell. So from dusty shops, neglected authors come, martyrs of pies and relics of the bum. So what are these books, unsold books, now used for? They are used for selling pies, right? Food. You know, you packed the pies, warm pies, in paper, right? Amader jemon jhalmuri thonga, right? Therefore, you pack this in the pages of the unsold books, and relics of the bum. So poor people would use these as toilet paper to wipe their backsides, right? So relics of the bum, once again, you can see that Dryden is using the scatological here to ridicule Shadwell. So instead of Persian carpets, you have the pages of the unsold poems. And who are these authors who are not sold? Much Heywood, Shirley, Ogleby, there lay. Ogleby, Heywood and Shirley we've already seen. Ogleby was a Scottish poet and dramatist, and characterized by Dryden to be a poor and inauthentic dramatist. Therefore, much Heywood, Shirley, Ogleby there lay, but loads of Shadwell almost choked the way. But the greatest author who remains unsold, whose books lay in dusty bookshelves, is Shadwell. So Dryden is once again creating that hierarchy of poor poets, the ancestry of poor poets: Heywood, Shirley, Ogleby, Flecknoe, Shadwell. And Shadwell is the climax of all these poor poets, the greatest poor poet to ever come. Bilked stationers for yeomen stood prepared. So there is, if you remember Buckingham Palace, a royal guard, a royal palace guard who line up so that the king might walk through them. Now, instead of the royal guard, the yeomen, who stand there? Bilked stationers. Bilked is cheated booksellers and publishers, stationers. Very often poets used to take money from these booksellers, and then they would cheat them by either not writing or writing such poor literature that they would never sell. So bilked stationers for yeomen stood prepared, and Herringman was captain of the guard. Now, Herringman, incidentally, was one of the leading publishers of the period, and he had published Dryden also, but later they had a falling out, they had a quarrel, and therefore Dryden ridicules Herringman as also being the publisher of Shadwell and standing guard over the empire of folly. So third parallel is where the royal guard is replaced by the cheated booksellers. And the hoary prince, hoary is gray-haired, also play on W-H-O-R-E, somebody who indulges in whores, right? So the hoary prince in majesty appeared, high on a throne of his labors reared. This is, of course, Flecknoe. And what is Flecknoe's throne built of? Flecknoe's throne is built of his unsold books. So once again, the pathetic parallel. It is not the peacock throne, but the throne that is built of his own unsold books. At his right hand, our young Ascanius sat, Rome's other hope and pillar of the state. Now remember that Ascanius here refers to the son of Aeneas. Aeneas is, of course, the hero of the Aeneid, but Aeneas' son, Ascanius, who founded the state of Rome. So Shadwell is being compared with Ascanius and Flecknoe with Aeneas. So therefore, this is the heroic parallel. Rome's other hope and the pillar of the state. His brows, thick fogs instead of glory's grace. So in the classical Greek coronation, on the forehead of the king would be laurel leaves. Laurel leaves would be the symbol of glory. Now, instead of laurel leaves, on Flecknoe's forehead, you have the rising fogs and therefore opium, poppy leaves, so that it signifies a state of fogginess and lack of intelligence. See how every single heroic detail is being replaced with a mock heroic detail, raising laughter after laughter. You're laughing at him and his lack of intelligence, lack of poetic sophistication. And lambent dullness played around his face. So interestingly, once again, Enid, there's a suggestion that around the king's face there is a light, jyoti, right, a light. Instead of that, around around Shadwell's face, there is a lambent, a dull light of non-intelligence. So Shadwell is absolutely stupid in his looks. As Hannibal did to the altars come, sworn by his sire, a mortal foe to Rome. Now the reference is, of course, to the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who was sworn by his father Hamilcar Barca, to eternal enmity against Rome. So Hamilcar swore his 9-year-old son Hannibal to attack Rome, and Hannibal almost succeeded in this effort. He defeated Rome, of course, but did not enter the city. Now, therefore, just like Hannibal, the great warrior, Shadwell is also a great warrior, but he's a warrior against intelligence and on the side of folly. So Shadwell swore, nor should his vow be vain, that he till death true dullness would maintain, and in his father's right and realm's defense, never to have peace with wit, not truce with sense. Now, please remember that here two epic parallels are punched or coalesced together, brought together. What are these two epic parallels? The first epic parallel is, of course, Hannibal's sworn eternal enmity against Rome, propelled by his father, right? So Flecknoe makes Shadwell swear eternal enmity against Rome. Flecknoe against wit and intelligence. Similarly, there's also another epic parallel, the epic parallel being that of Milton's Satan, who swears eternal enmity against goodness. So there are two epic parallels joined together. One is Hannibal, the other is Satan. And therefore, once again, it comes crashing down through the bathos when we realize that Shadwell is swearing eternal enmity against sense, against rationality and intelligence. The king himself, this is Flecknoe, the king himself, the sacred unction made. So he spread the holy water, and as king by office and as priest by trade. So here once again, the sprinkling of holy water is a protocol that is undertaken both during the coronation and the initiation of the priest. So we have superimposed upon the metaphor of the coronation the metaphor of the initiation of the priest as well. And you see why, Debarpita probably asked me why Flecknoe. Because Flecknoe is both a priest as well as a writer. He was a Catholic priest, remember. Therefore, Dryden could... Dryden could, through Flecknoe, combine the metaphor of coronation of the poet as well as the metaphor of the initiation of the priest. It is probably because of this that Dryden had taken Flecknoe as a model of poor poetry. Right. So, once again, as king by office and as priest by trade, in his sinister hand instead of ball. Now, please remember that the king, when he walks to the throne, to the playing of music, he has two things in his hand. In the right hand, he holds the scepter. Scepter is the Rajdanda, right? The scepter. And in his other hand, he holds a ball that symbolizes the globe, and therefore signifies that the king dominates over the globe. Therefore, in Flecknoe's sinister hand, in the sense, sinister is in the sense of what you can call a hand which only can create mischief, right? In his sinister hand, instead of ball, he placed a mighty mug of potent ale, right? Now, remember that the orb or the ball, the globe, is on his left hand, the king's left hand. So in his left hand, instead of a globe, which signifies his great conquest of the world, what does what does Shadwell hold? He holds only a mug of potent ale, of wine. Therefore, once again, the suggestion is that when you are intoxicated, when you drink, you lose your sense, right? Therefore, Flecknoe's mug and Shadwell's mug is a symbol of the fact that they are completely inebriated and have lost all sense. You see how every single detail of this coronation ceremony is replaced point by point. Love's kingdom to his right he did convey. So instead of the scepter, what did he hold in his right hand? Love's kingdom. Flecknoe's play, poor play. So instead of the scepter and the globe, you have a mug of ale and the book of Flecknoe, the play of Flecknoe. At once his scepter and his rule of sway, whose righteous lore the prince had practiced young, and from whose lions recorded Psyche sprung. So the suggestion is that Shadwell had imitated Flecknoe's Love's Kingdom from his childhood, right? So there's a suggestion that Shadwell can write only poor poetry and that he had plagiarized from another poor poet, his father, Flecknoe, from whose loins recorded Psyche sprung. Loins is the groin, from whose loins recorded Psyche sprung. Psyche is the play by Shadwell. Therefore, you see, the suggestion is that from Love's Kingdom of Flecknoe to Shadwell's Psyche, it is a continuous cycle of poor literature. So Shadwell, in that sense, is the true heir of Richard Flecknoe. His temples, last with poppies, were overspread, as I pointed out. Instead of a jyoti, or instead of light around his head, you have lambent dullness. And instead of the laurel leaves, you have the seeds, the leaves of the poppy plant. So together with that ale, which is intoxicating, wine, and the poppy seeds, which create only sleep and somnolence, right? Somebody who is always asleep, therefore unintelligent, organ, right? Therefore, this entire metaphor creates an atmosphere of non-intelligence, lack of light, and a complete absence of sense for Flecknoe and Shadwell. Flecknoe, the king, passing over this nonsense, this lack of sense, to Shadwell, the prince in waiting, the king in waiting. His temples last with poppies were overspread, that nodding seemed to consecrate his head. Just at that point of time, if fame not lie, on his left hand 12 reverend owls did fly. So Romulus, 'tis sung by Tiber's brook, presage of sway from twice 6 vultures took. Now here is another epic classical allusion. What is the allusion? The allusion is that the two kings who established Rome were Remus and Romulus. Remus and Romulus, from whom the name Rome comes. Now they had a conflict, they had a difference in opinion as to where the capital would be set. And that, how did they decide it? They decided it through the omen. You see, when they flew their owls, actually for Remus 6 eagles appeared, they flew their eagles. And for Romulus, 12 eagles flew, right? Now the eagle was the symbol of the Roman Empire. Eagle is a bird which is associated with strength, intelligence, and sharpness. Now in case of Shadwell, so in case of Romulus, there was 12 owls. Therefore, he took presage, he took eminence, right? Instead of those 12 eagles, symbols of perfection, symbols of sharpness and intelligence and strength, what do you have? For Shadwell, there was 12 owls which were released. Now the owl, if you remember, is a nocturnal bird, sleeps during the day, and is generally considered to be a symbol of non-intelligence, right? So it is apt that during Shadwell's coronation, 12 owls will be released. You see, this is the craft of the mock heroic. Now, Dryden has released an epic parallel. It's a pretty difficult allusion, isn't it? That, he's referring to Remus and Romulus and the 12, eagles. Instead of the 12 eagles, what you have is a pathetic replacement with a very apt bird, the owl, which remains a symbol of non-intelligence. So what we are noticing here is that every single epic detail of the coronation is being replaced by a mock heroic parallel. Now you are doing the poem, Milton's poem, Paradise Lost. Now, what does an epic use as a style? An epic uses what is called a grand style, deliberately high-flown language. And very important part of the epic is the presence of an epic simile. What is an epic simile? An epic simile is where the point of greatness of a person or a description is made not through one simile, right? But it is a succession of comparisons. So that cumulatively, 3, 4, 5, 6 comparisons together build up a humongous, an enormous simile that highlights the greatness of the epic hero, his dressing, or the battle scene. This is how the epic simile functions. It's a cluster of similes, as it were. Now, what happens here in the coronation is this great epic simile almost, which is built up through several epic details, several epic comparisons. For example, you have this comparison with Remus and Romulus, you have a comparison with Satan, you have a comparison with, for example, Hannibal. So these are the epic similes that are being built up of the coronation. And then comes the epic bathos, as it were, the mock heroic bathos. And therefore, Dryden is throwing up simile after simile, comparison after comparison, allusion after allusion, and every single allusion is releasing laughter. When you realize that instead of vultures, you actually, or the eagles, you actually have the owls. And you see, this is the craft, the way in which every single detail is being replaced by the mock heroic parallel, every laughter is being released, every ridicule is being released, and together cumulatively, it is coming up as one very dynamic, very powerful Juvenalian moment of ridicule and laughter. This is how the coronation scene is progressing, or this is how the coronation scene is, as it were, created as the climax of this poem. And it is in this climax of the poem, when Shadwell is, as it were, being crowned king, that you also have the bathos, which reaches the climax as well. Right. So presage of sway from twice 6 vultures took, so that's 12 owls. The admiring throngs loud acclamations make. This is what would be the praise of the king, Joyodhoni jetake bola hoy. The admiring throng loud acclamations make, and omens of his future empire take. And then comes the moment when the crown is transferred. The sire then shook the honors of his head, and from his brows damps of oblivion shed. So is sweating tears of oblivion, of non-intelligence once again. Full on the filial dullness, long he stood. So he stood, composed himself, and now Flecknoe is going to make a farewell speech again. So, full on the filial dullness, long he stood, repelling from his breast the raging god, at length burst out in this prophetic mood. So this is the last great detail of the coronation, that, the king will now be making the farewell speech. It is interesting here that Shadwell never speaks in this text. It is Flecknoe alone, and Flecknoe alone who makes the farewell speech. So Shadwell is rendered completely silent by Dryden. Heavens, now in this particular section which we will discuss, Dryden has so far built up Shadwell as a fool, somebody who's a symbol of nonsense. He's built up Shadwell as a poor poet in a long line of poor poets. But he has only occasionally referred to Shadwell's texts. And he has only occasionally referred to Shadwell's poor craft. The rest of the poem, as you will find out, is completely dedicated to the demolition of Shadwell's literary achievements. Here, the allusions are no longer to classical sources, but largely these are allusions to Shadwell's plays and scenes from Shadwell's own texts. So this is where the satire becomes sharper. This is where Dryden attacks Shadwell more personally. So heavens bless my son, from Ireland let him reign. Remember that, Flecknoe was an Irish poet. Therefore, and MacFlecknoe is, of course, referring to the Irish son of Flecknoe. Therefore, it is apt that, Flecknoe's reign start from Ireland. So from Ireland to far Barbados on the western main. Now, it seems, therefore, that Shadwell's kingdom is enormous, from Ireland in Europe to Barbados in the West Indies. But remember, if you take a look at the map, at the world map, you will find that from Ireland to Barbados lies the transatlantic ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, Shadwell's empire largely is zero, zilch. There's nothing apart from water, right? So this is again a mock heroic parallel. Of his dominion may no end be known, and greater than his father's be his throne. So let Shadwell be an even poorer poet, even greater fool. Beyond love's kingdom, that's Flecknoe's own play, let him stretch his pen. He paused, and all the people cried, Amen. So let him write even worse plays. He paused, and all the people cried, Amen. Then thus continued he, My son, advance. So you advance, you take the throne. Still new in impudence, new ignorance. So your ignorance, your stupidity is still not climaxed. You will progress even more. So you'll write even more stupid plays. Success let other teach. Learn thou from me pangs without birth and fruitless industry. So you learn from me how to write bad plays, how to toil without any success, without any concrete result. So Dryden is dismissing both Flecknoe and Shadwell's plays and toils as absolutely without any kind of merit. Let virtuosos in 5 years be writ. So virtuoso is Shadwell's play, and Dryden is suggesting that Shadwell is laboring to write a play over 5 years, so he's a very poor poet. Yet not one thought accuse thy toil of wit. But there's, even if it takes 5 years, one cannot say there is a jot of intelligence or greatness in that play. So a play written over 5 years has no merit at all. Let gentle George in this case, being George Etheridge, one of the premier Restoration comedy writers, author of The Man of Maud, George Etheridge. So let gentle George in triumph tread the stage, make Doriment betray and love it rage. So this is the reference to The Man of Maud, the rake being called Doriment. So let him write his great plays. Let Cully, Cockwood, Fopling charm the pit, and in their folly show the writer's wit. So Dryden is here comparing the greatness of George Etheridge and his play, which is written with intelligence, which is written with great finesse and sophistication. So he says, let them rule the stage. You, on the other hand, what will you do? Yet still thy fools shall stand in thy defense and justify their author's want of sense. So your characters will not be as sophisticated as Etheridge's characters. They will all be mirror images of you, great fools. So your characters are like you, only foolish. So let them all be thy own model made, of dullness and desire no foreign aid. So you can write naturally only fools, and about folly you can only create foolish characters. Let thy men of wit too be the same. So even your heroes and your fools are the same. They're all foolish because you have no intelligence yourself. All full of thee and differing but in name, but let no alien Sedley interpose to lard with wit thy Epsom prose. Now the reference is of course to Sir Charles Sedley, who was a court wit and poet and patron of Dryden and Shadwell both. Now Sedley was a witty poet and dramatist, but Dryden is suggesting that you Shadwell are completely alien to Sedley. Alien is different, separate, right? So if Sedley, I'm sorry, is witty, intelligent, then you are an alien to Sedley's wit and intelligence. You are foolish, and you create a prose that lacks wit completely, as in your play, and is referring to Shadwell's play, Epsom Wells. Right. So therefore, Dryden is suggesting that there is a train of good writers. Just as there is an ancestry of bad writers, you have Heywood, Shirley, Ogilvy, Flecknoe, Shadwell. You have good writers, Johnson, Fletcher, you have Etheridge, you have Sedley, and presumably you have Dryden. So there's a kind of a binary being created of good writing and bad writing with its own ancestry. Good writing is located in Drury Lane in the Court. Bad writing is located in Grub Street. Good writing has an ancestry. Bad writing also has an ancestry. Dryden is therefore creating this binary between good literature and bad literature, right? Between wit and folly. Wit being intelligence, the literature of wit, and the literature of folly. So, when false flowers of rhetoric thou wouldest cull, trust nature and do not labor to be dull. So, when you write false rhetoric, rhetoric is the art of speaking. Therefore, you are creating high-flown verses, but they're all stupid and foolish because you are naturally foolish. Your nature is foolish. Now remember, Shakespeare, when he created his fools, speaks about the fool as being nature's natural, having no sophistication, right? There's this debate between nature and nurture. You know, culture nurtures man, right? Nature is unsophisticated in that sense of the term. And therefore, the fool is nature's natural, whereas the great artist is nurtured and trained. So, Shadwell is foolish and natural, whereas the great writers are nurtured and trained. Right? So, trust nature, do not labor. You don't have to be labored to be dull. Whatever you write is dull by nature. But write thy best and top, and in each line Sir Formal's oratory will be thine. You know, Sir Formal, of course, is one of the characters in Shadwell's play, the virtuoso, who is prone to making bombastic speeches. Bombastic is, you know, high flown without any sense. So your oratory is the oratory of Sir Formal. It is bombast without any substance. So what you can locate here is now how the satire moves away from bad poetry of others to Shadwell's plays and their allusions. Dryden here is now attacking Shadwell almost personally. Sir Formal's oratory will be thine. Sir Formal, though unsought, attends thy quill. Quill is the pen, right? So Sir Formal is the one who inspires you when you write and does thy northern dedications fill. Now, many of Shadwell's plays were dedicated to the Duke and Duchess of Newcastle. So Dryden is here referring to these northern dedications. If you see the map of England, you will find that Newcastle is right on top. Just before you enter Scotland, you have Newcastle. So Newcastle on the River Tyne is on the north. So that is why Dryden is referring to the northern dedications. Now also remember that Shadwell is born in Norfolk, right? So Shadwell is pushed out on the fringes of England, on the margins of England. is a northern poet with northern dedications. Not let false friends seduce thy mind to fame by arrogating Johnson's hostile name. Now, this is a very important segment of the poem. He says that you do not need to claim Johnson's fame. So why? Because we have seen that Shadwell proclaimed himself to be the literary heir of Ben Jonson and the writer of humorous comedy. This was his conflict with Dryden, remember? That Dryden wrote comedy of manners while Shadwell wrote a comedy of humors. But Dryden is suggesting that you need not take Johnson's name. You do not have the qualities of Johnson. So Dryden is stripping Shadwell of the claim to be the heir to Ben Jonson. Instead, who are his ancestors? Heywood, Shirley, Ogleby, Flecknoe. So Dryden is suggesting that Shadwell is antithetical, a binary, completely opposed to the literary sophistication of Jonson. He rather belongs to a school of poor poetry, poor drama, and farce rather than comedy. Right? This is how, you see, Dryden is stripping Shadwell of all claims of literary genius. What share have thou art my blood? I'm sorry. Let Father Flecknoe. So instead of Jonson, who will inspire you? Father Flecknoe, fire thy mind with praise, and Uncle Ogleby thy envy raise. So you belong to the school, Heywood, Shirley, Ogleby, and Flecknoe. You need not claim anything from Jonson. Thou art my blood, where Jonson has no part. So I am your inspirer. You are as unintelligent, stupid, and a poor poet like me. Thou art my blood, where Jonson has no part. What share have we in nature or in art? So we have no art within us. We have no sophistication within us. We are merely nature's natural. We are merely fools. Now, I will keep the last few lines for the next class so that we can then have that class and fold this up. But my point being here is that in this particular discussion, what we've looked at is two aspects. One is the climactic coronation scene, where every single epic parallel is replaced with a mock heroic parallel, thereby generating almost an epic simile, generating laughter after laughter, ridicule after ridicule, and establishing Shadwell as an emperor of folly and poor poetry. It has also referred to the contemporary literary scenario, Grub Street. But then the poem takes a separate turn. And then Dryden attacks Shadwell directly. He attacks Shadwell's claim that Shadwell is the inheritor of the Johnsonian comedy of humors and suggests that Shadwell can write only farces, only pathetic farces without any sophistication. So Shadwell has no literary ability. Instead, he suggests that the true great writers are Jonson and later on George Etheridge, whose fools and whose heroes both reflect his wit. Instead, Shadwell's plays and Shadwell's characters, like Sir Formal, only reflect his vacuity of mind, his emptiness of mind, and his lack of either sense or poetic craft. It is thus that in the closure of the poem turns even more pungent, even more vitriolic, even more corrosive. And this attack uses Shadwell's texts as illusions and attacks his literary abilities to the sharpest. It is thus that you can see that as the poem progresses, the poem becomes much more personal, almost becomes on the verges of the lampoon, ridiculing every single instance of Shadwell's literary texts. Right. We'll stop here and we shall take up the final few lines of MacFlecknoe with concluding remarks and folding up of the poem tomorrow morning. Right. Stop the recording here.